I thought my love story had ended the night I signed the divorce papers. I was wrong, and I did not realize how wrong I was until a woman across a bookstore looked at me as if she already knew the part of my heart I had buried. My name is Margaret Carter, and at 52, I had become very good at being alone. 3 months after my divorce, I had stopped checking my phone for messages that were never coming. I stopped wearing the gold ring I had kept in a kitchen drawer, even though I still woke, sometimes expecting to feel its weight on my hand. That rainy Saturday, I walked into a little bookstore in Boston because I needed somewhere quiet. I was reaching for a novel on the top shelf when another hand reached for the same book. Our fingers almost touched. I pulled mine back. "You can take it," I said. "I have read it before." The woman smiled. "Then you know it is worth taking." Her name was Claire Bennett. She was 38, with chestnut hair, warm green eyes, and a calm expression that made the crowded bookstore seem suddenly quieter. I laughed before I could stop myself. It was a small laugh, but it surprised me. I had not heard that sound from myself in weeks. Claire glanced at the book in my hand. "You have read this one before, too?" I looked down. It was the same novel my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary. I had not realized I had picked it up. My throat tightened. Claire noticed. She did not ask why. Instead, she said, "Sometimes we return to old stories because we are ready to understand them differently." I looked at her. Something about the sentence stayed with me. We talked for 10 minutes, maybe 15. She told me she had recently returned to Boston after spending several years away. I told her almost nothing about myself. Still, she seemed comfortable with the silence. That was unusual. Most people filled silence because they were afraid of it. Claire seemed to respect it. When we finally stepped outside, the rain had softened into a mist. She opened her umbrella and held it between us. "Do you want to get coffee?" she asked. My first instinct was to say no. It had become my safest word. No dates. No complications. No starting over. Then she smiled, and I heard myself say, "Maybe." We walked 2 blocks to a small cafe. I kept telling myself it was only coffee. Nothing more. Yet when she laughed across the table, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically. Not enough to call it hope. Just enough to make me wonder whether I had mistaken an ending for a beginning. Before we left, Claire looked at the book beneath my arm. "You should finish that story," she said. "You might be surprised by the ending." I smiled, but when I stepped back into the rain, one question followed me all the way home. Why did meeting her feel less like something new and more like something I had been waiting for? The strange thing about meeting Claire was that I kept expecting the feeling to disappear. It did not. 3 days after the bookstore, I walked into a Saturday writing class at a community center near Beacon Hill, hoping to spend 2 quiet hours somewhere no one knew me. I was halfway through taking off my coat when I heard a familiar laugh behind me. I turned. Claire was standing near the window, holding a paper cup of coffee. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. "Maybe we have the same taste in books and bad weather." I laughed. "Apparently." She moved toward an empty chair beside her. "Sit here." I hesitated. Not because I did not want to. Because I did. That realization made my pulse quicken. I sat down. The instructor began talking about writing honestly, about the difference between telling a story and admitting something you had spent years avoiding. I almost smiled at the irony. Claire leaned toward me and whispered, "This feels dangerous already." Her voice was soft enough that only I could hear it. "It is a writing class," I whispered back. "Exactly." I had to look away so she would not see me smiling. During the first exercise, we were asked to write about a moment we wished we could relive. I stared at the blank page for almost a minute. I could have written about my wedding, my children, the first house my husband and I bought. Instead, I wrote about a summer afternoon when I was 32, sitting alone beside the ocean before I had married. Before I had learned how easily a person could disappear inside a life built for 2. When I looked up, Claire was watching me. "What did you write?" she asked. "Something I forgot." "That sounds important." I smiled faintly. "Maybe." She did not push. That was becoming her habit. She never pushed. She simply stayed close enough for me to choose what to say. During the break, we stood outside beneath a pale November sky. The air smelled like wet pavement and coffee. Claire tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Are you always this careful?" I knew exactly what she meant. "Yes." She smiled. I noticed. "Is that bad?" "No, just lonely." The word landed harder than I expected. I looked at her. "You do not know me well enough to say that." "Maybe not." Her eyes held mine. But I know what loneliness looks like. For a moment, the street noise seemed to fade. I felt warmth rise into my face. Claire looked away first. Then my phone buzzed. The message was from my former husband. We need to talk. There are things you do not know. The warmth vanished. Claire saw my expression change. Bad news. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. I do not know yet. She nodded. Then you do not have to deal with it alone. I looked at her, surprised by how much those words mattered. I had spent months telling myself I was fine alone. Yet as we walked back inside, one uncomfortable thought followed me. Maybe I was not afraid of loving someone again. Maybe I was afraid that I had already started to. The message from my ex arrived at 8:17 that morning. I saw her with you. We need to talk. I stared at those 6 words while the coffee beside me went cold, because only one thought kept repeating in my mind. How had he already found out about Claire? I had been divorced for 3 months, and I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. My name is Margaret Carter, and at 52, I had built my days around one simple rule. Do not reopen doors you worked so hard to close. Yet somehow, Claire Bennett had walked into my life through a bookstore, a writing class, and a cup of coffee. And now my carefully controlled world was beginning to shift. After class, I tried to convince myself that I should go home. Instead, I found myself waiting outside the community center. Claire appeared a few minutes later, carrying a canvas bag and looking slightly surprised to see me. You stayed, she said. I smiled. Apparently. Were you waiting for me? The question was gentle, but I felt warmth rise into my face. Maybe. She laughed softly. We walked toward a small cafe on Charles Street. The sidewalks were still damp from the morning rain, and the air smelled like wet leaves and roasted coffee. For the first few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Books, Boston weather, the terrible music playing inside the cafe. Then Claire asked, "What made you start writing again?" I looked through the window. I stopped recognizing myself. She did not interrupt. During my marriage, I became very good at being whatever everyone needed me to be. Wife, mother, problem solver. I forgot what it felt like to simply be Margaret. Claire stirred her coffee slowly. And now I am trying to remember. She looked at me for a long second. I think you are doing better than you realize. Something about her voice made the words feel different. Personal. I lowered my eyes. You barely know me. I know. She smiled. That is why I am not pretending to know everything. We both laughed, and the tension softened. Then her hand moved across the table to pick up a napkin. Mine moved at the same moment. Our fingers brushed. It lasted less than a second. Still, I felt it. A tiny spark. A warmth that traveled through me before I could reason it away. Claire looked at my hand, then at my eyes. Neither of us moved. Sorry, she whispered. You do not have to apologize. Her smile was almost shy. Good. My phone buzzed again. I looked down. Another message from my ex. You need to hear what I found out about Claire. My stomach tightened. I looked across the table. Claire was watching my face now. What happened? I turned the phone face down. I do not know. Is it about me? I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect the strange, fragile peace we had created. But something inside me knew the answer was already waiting. Maybe. Claire's expression changed. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to recognition. Margaret, she said quietly, there is something I should have told you. And suddenly, the woman who had felt like the beginning of something beautiful looked like she might also be carrying a piece of my past. I should have told you before you trusted me, Claire said, and suddenly the cafe felt much smaller. I watched her carefully, waiting for the explanation that might erase the warmth I had felt only minutes earlier. It did not. Claire folded her hands around her coffee cup. My mother knew your husband. I stared at her. How? Years ago, they worked on the same nonprofit board. I remembered the organization immediately. It had been one of my husband's favorite causes, the place where he spent long evenings and weekend afternoons while telling me he was helping people. Claire looked down. My mother left the board after she discovered financial records that did not make sense. My chest tightened, and my husband was involved. I do not know how deeply. Her voice was careful. That is what I came back to Boston to understand. I pushed my chair back slightly. So you knew who I was? Not at first. She met my eyes. I knew your last name. Then I saw you at the bookstore and realized. And you still asked me for coffee. Yes. Why? She took a breath. Because by then, I already liked you. The honesty caught me off guard. I looked toward the window. People hurried along the wet sidewalk, carrying umbrellas, completely unaware that my afternoon had just changed shape. Claire, you should have told me. I know. You cannot build trust by leaving out the part that matters. I know that too. Her voice cracked slightly. I wanted to stay angry. It would have been easier. Anger had clear edges. Attraction did not. I gathered my coat. I need some time. Claire nodded. I understand. I left the cafe before I could change my mind. 2 days passed. I did not call her. I went to work. I answered emails. I attended meetings. I cooked dinner for one. Everything looked normal from the outside. Inside, I kept hearing her voice. By Thursday, I received an email from the community center. The weekend writing retreat had been moved to a small coastal house in Rockport because the original location had a heating problem. Attendance was limited. Claire was already on the list. I almost canceled. Then I remembered why I had joined the class. I wanted to stop living from fear. So Friday afternoon, I drove north. When I arrived, Claire was standing on the porch beneath a gray sky, holding a stack of notebooks. She looked surprised. You came. I almost did not. I am glad you did. I set my bag down. We need to talk. She nodded. We do. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and coffee. Rain tapped against the windows. The other participants arrived one by one, then disappeared into the upstairs rooms. By evening, Claire and I were the only 2 people still downstairs. She placed 2 mugs on the kitchen table. You can ask me anything. I looked at her. Anything. Anything. I sat down. For the first time, there was nowhere to rush away to. No cafe door. No courthouse hallway. No easy excuse. Just rain, silence, and the woman who had somehow become important to me. Start with my husband, I said. Claire took a slow breath. All right. Then she told me something I had never heard before, and it changed the way I remembered my entire marriage. Claire told me that my husband had not been the man I thought he was during the final year of our marriage. Not because of another affair. That would have been almost easier to understand. Instead, he had quietly used the nonprofit to cover financial mistakes made by people he trusted, and when Claire's mother questioned the records, he had helped convince the board that she was mistaken. Claire's mother left with her reputation damaged, even though she had been right. I listened without interrupting. Rain tapped against the windows of the coastal house, steady and soft. Why did you never tell me? I asked. Claire looked down. Because I did not know whether you knew. I did not. I know. Her answer was immediate. That is why I felt guilty. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the ocean was barely visible through the mist. So you came back to Boston to clear your mother's name. Yes. And then you met me. Claire nodded. And everything became complicated. I turned toward her. You could have used me. I could have. She did not defend herself. But I never wanted to. How am I supposed to believe that? She looked at me for a long moment. You do not have to believe me tonight. That answer hurt more than an argument would have. I sat back down. Tell me everything. Claire explained that her mother had kept copies of the original records. She had recently found them among old family papers, and one document contained my husband's signature. But there was something else. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. I found this after my mother died. She placed it on the table. Inside was a handwritten note from my former husband. I recognized his handwriting immediately. The note was dated 2 years before our divorce. It mentioned the nonprofit and said he had regretted allowing other people to take responsibility for decisions he knew were wrong. My hands went cold. He knew. Claire nodded. He knew your mother was right? Yes. I stared at the page. Suddenly, memories I had dismissed began rearranging themselves. The late nights. The secretive phone calls. The sudden trips. The way he had always changed the subject whenever I asked about the nonprofit. Why did he never tell me? Claire's voice softened. Maybe because telling you would have forced him to admit who he had become. I looked at her. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then Claire reached across the table and stopped before touching my hand. Margaret, I am sorry. I looked at her fingers resting inches from mine. I know. My voice broke slightly. And I am sorry I made you feel like you had to earn my trust. Claire shook her head. You were hurt before I met you. That does not make it fair. No, she smiled sadly. But it makes it human. I finally placed my hand over hers. Neither of us moved. The warmth was simple, safe, and somehow more frightening than any secret she had told me. Because I realized I was no longer sitting across from someone I suspected. I was sitting beside someone I trusted. Then my phone lit up on the table. My former husband was calling. I looked at Claire. She did not tell me what to do. She simply waited. For the first time, I understood that the choice had to be mine. My former husband called 3 times that night. I let every call go unanswered. Claire sat across from me in the quiet coastal house, her hands wrapped around a mug that had already gone cold. She did not ask me to stay. She did not ask me to leave. Somehow, that made the decision harder. You should probably talk to him, she said softly. Eventually, I looked at her. You are not going to tell me what he might say? No, she gave me a small, tired smile. Because I do not want to become another person making choices for you. That sentence stayed with me. For years, people had made choices around me. My husband decided what I needed to know. I decided what everyone else needed from me. Somewhere in between, Margaret had disappeared. The next morning, I drove back to Boston alone. The sky had cleared, and sunlight reflected off the Charles River as if the city had decided to begin again. I went straight to my former husband's office. He looked older than I remembered. Not dramatically, just enough to remind me that time had been moving even when I was not paying attention. He asked me to sit. I remained standing. I read the note. His face changed. Claire showed you. Yes. He sighed. There are things I should have told you years ago. I listened. He admitted that he had known about the nonprofit records. He admitted that he had chosen silence because he was afraid of losing his position and disappointing the people around him. Then he said something I did not expect. I thought if I kept everything under control, I could protect our marriage. I almost laughed. You did not protect our marriage. You protected the version of yourself you wanted me to believe. He looked down. For once, I did not feel responsible for making him feel better. I told him I wanted the remaining paperwork finalized and nothing more. When I walked outside, my phone felt heavy in my pocket. Claire had sent one message. Are you okay? I stared at it for a long time before replying. I think I am becoming okay. Her answer came almost immediately. Good. That evening, I returned to the coastal house to collect the notebook I had left behind. Claire was on the porch, watching the sunset. She looked at me, and I could see the question in her eyes. It is over, I said. The marriage. The explanations. All of it. She nodded slowly. How do you feel? I thought about it. Free. Claire smiled, but there was sadness underneath it. Then you should go live your life. I stepped closer. I am. She looked surprised. What does that mean? I took a breath. It means I do not want to disappear into another relationship. But it also means I do not want to pretend I feel nothing when I look at you. Claire's expression softened. Margaret, I am not asking you to fix anything. I paused. I am asking if we can start honestly. She smiled through the uncertainty in her eyes. I would like that. We stood together while the last light settled over the water. Nothing was solved yet. Nothing was guaranteed. But for the first time in years, I was not choosing the safest path. I was choosing the truest one. For the next 3 weeks, Claire and I tried to pretend that starting honestly meant starting simply. It did not. We met for coffee after work. We exchanged messages about books, weather, and the strange little details that made ordinary days feel less ordinary. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes we sat quietly and watched people hurry past the cafe windows. I was learning that affection did not always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it arrived quietly, through consistency, through remembering how someone took her coffee, through noticing when her voice sounded tired, through wanting to tell her something before telling anyone else. And that scared me more than I expected. One Thursday evening, Claire invited me to dinner at her apartment. Nothing about the evening felt dramatic. We cooked pasta, argued playfully about whether basil belonged in the sauce, and laughed when I spilled flour across the counter. I caught myself thinking, this feels like home. Then I stopped. Home had once been a word I trusted. I was not ready to give it away again. Claire noticed my silence. Where did you just go? She asked. I looked at her. Somewhere I do not want to visit anymore. She nodded. Then stay here. The simplicity of those words nearly broke my heart. I stayed. We talked until after midnight. Claire told me about her mother, about the years she spent away from Boston, and about how difficult it had been to return to a city filled with memories. Then she looked at me with an expression I had learned to recognize. There is something I have not told you. My chest tightened. What now? She smiled sadly. Nothing terrible. She reached for a photograph from a shelf. It showed her mother standing beside a younger woman. I recognized the second woman immediately. My former husband's sister. I stared at the photograph. How did you know her? Claire explained that her mother had met my former sister-in-law during the nonprofit investigation. They had exchanged information and remained friends for years. That connection was how Claire had eventually learned my name. But then Claire said something that changed everything. I did not come back because of your husband. I looked at her. Then why did you come back? She took a slow breath. Because I had unfinished business with myself. She told me she had spent years believing that leaving Boston meant leaving her past behind. But after her mother died, she realized she had also left behind the person she used to be. She wanted to return and build a life that belonged to her. And then I met you, she said. And I realized I wanted someone in that life. My eyes filled with tears. Claire, I am 14 years older than you. I know. People will have opinions. They already do. I am still learning how to trust myself. She smiled gently. Then learn. I am not asking you to become someone else for me. I reached across the table and held her hand. For once, I did not pull away from the feeling. But the next morning, everything changed. I received an email from Claire's former employer stating that documents connected to her mother's investigation had been found. One name appeared repeatedly in the records. Mine. And suddenly, I wondered whether our growing relationship had been built on a truth neither of us fully understood. The email stayed open on my screen for almost 10 minutes. My name appeared in the records 3 times. Margaret Carter. Each entry was connected to a meeting I barely remembered from years ago, back when my husband had asked me to attend one nonprofit dinner as his wife. I had signed a guest sheet. I had listened to speeches. I had gone home early because our daughter had been sick. That was all. At least, that was what I remembered. I called Claire. She answered on the second ring. You saw it. It was not a question. Yes. Silence filled the space between us. Why is my name in those records? I asked. I do not know yet. Her voice sounded tired. But I am going to find out. Claire, I need you to tell me something. What? Did you ever believe I was involved? She did not answer immediately. That pause hurt more than I expected. For a moment, she said quietly. Then I remembered the woman I met in that bookstore. I closed my eyes. That is not an answer. No, it is not. She took a breath. I never thought you intentionally did anything wrong. But I wondered whether you knew more than you told me. I looked around my apartment. The same walls. The same furniture. The same life I had built while believing I understood it. I did not know, I said. I believe you. Her voice softened. But I need to understand why your name is there. We agreed to meet that evening. When Claire arrived, she carried the folder from the investigation. We sat at my kitchen table, side by side, going through the records. One document showed that my husband had used my name as a reference for a financial decision. I stared at the signature beneath it. It looked like mine, but I knew I had never signed that page. He used your name without telling you, Claire whispered. The realization changed something inside me. For years, I had blamed myself for not noticing the warning signs. Now I understood that I had been deliberately kept outside decisions that affected my own life. Claire reached for my hand. I let her. I am sorry, she said. You do not have to be. I want to be. I looked at her. Why? Her eyes filled with emotion. Because I care about you, Margaret. And I am afraid that everything connected to my past is going to make you believe you cannot trust me. I swallowed hard. I am afraid of that too. She nodded. Then maybe we should stop pretending this is easy. That honesty settled between us. No promises. No dramatic declarations. Just 2 women sitting at a kitchen table, choosing truth over comfort. Then Claire opened the final document. Her expression changed. What? I asked. She turned the page toward me. At the bottom was a handwritten note from her mother. It said that one person had tried to warn her before the investigation began. That person was me. I stared at the sentence, unable to breathe for a moment. I warned her. Claire nodded slowly. You did not remember because you thought it was nothing. And suddenly, I understood the second truth. I had spent years believing I was powerless inside my marriage. Maybe I had been stronger than I ever knew. Claire squeezed my hand. You were already trying to protect someone, she whispered. You just never realized it. The note changed everything, but not in the way I expected. I remembered that night slowly. My husband had come home late from another nonprofit meeting, and I had noticed a folder on the kitchen counter. I had asked him about it. He had told me it was nothing important. I had believed him because believing him had once been easier than questioning everything. But later that evening, I had called the nonprofit office and asked whether Claire's mother had been informed about the financial concerns. I remembered saying that someone needed to tell her the truth. Then I had forgotten about it. Claire looked at me across the kitchen table. You tried to help my mother. I nodded. I did not even remember. She smiled through tears. Maybe that is what makes it matter. For the first time, the past did not feel like a chain around my life. It felt like a chapter one could finally close. Over the next few weeks, the remaining records were reviewed, and my name was cleared completely. More importantly, Claire and I stopped, letting the past decide what we were allowed to become. We took things slowly. We went for long walks. We visited the bookstore where we had first met. We returned to the little cafe where our hands had first brushed across a table. One evening, Claire handed me the same novel I had picked up that rainy Saturday. You finished it? She asked. I smiled. Yes. And I looked at her. The ending surprised me. She laughed. Good. I held the book against my chest. I used to think starting over meant becoming someone new. Claire waited. Now I think it means finally becoming yourself. She reached for my hand, and this time I did not hesitate. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, we sat beside my apartment window with 2 cups of coffee. Boston was waking beneath a pale blue sky. Claire was reading. I was watching the sunlight move across the floor. Nothing about the moment was dramatic. That was what made it beautiful. I had spent years believing love had to be certain before I could trust it. Claire taught me something different. Love could begin with uncertainty. Healing could begin with a question. And a new life could begin with one small choice to stop living according to an old story. I looked at Claire and smiled. She looked up from her book. What? She asked. Nothing. That is suspicious. I laughed. I was just thinking that I am happy. She closed the book. You are allowed to be. I reached across the table and took her hand. At 52, I no longer felt like a woman waiting for the next chapter of her life to begin. I was living it. And I finally understood that sometimes the ending we fear is only the quiet space before something better has room to arrive. Thank you for spending these moments with us. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who might need a little hope, and stay with us for more stories about healing, courage, and finding love when you least expect it.